Welcome, beautiful people, to season 2, episode 16, and the finale of season 2 of Jahmi Roc's Jottings, the seriously silly space for intentional musicology, sonic joy, and the kind of reggae and, in general, musical insight that'll keep your mind rocking and your thoughts swaying. I'm your host, Jahmi Roc, aka Racquel Bernard. Let's jam our way into a conversation with Jheanelle Brown, a dear, dear friend of mine and part of my chosen family. Jheanelle, thank you so much for being a guest on my
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you for thinking to include me.
Of course, darling. So before we jump into everything for our audience, do you mind introducing yourself a bit?
Mm-hmm. My name is Jheanelle. Um, she, her pronouns. Um, guess we've known each other for about 10 years. I'm Jamaican American. I'm of heritage. I mostly do work in film studies. Yeah. Anything else I should hit on?
That's perfect. That's
Okay, okay.
perfect. Yeah, totally. And we have a few different things we want to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
as Jamaicans. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were noting that it's interesting how people kind of wage wars around names, right? So I remember referring to myself as a Jamaican, and someone was like, "No, Raquel, you're Jamaican. You were born there. I am a Jamaican. My parents are from Jamaica, and I was born in America, making me the Jamaican." And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I came here when I was
Mm-hmm.
8.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like, I feel like Jamaican still counts for me. How do you feel
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah. No, it's funny because when you said it, I was like, oh yeah, Raquel does. Sometimes I forget that you call yourself that. So I was kind of like, but I mean, I think because you came young, honestly, you could go either or, right? Like,
Mhm.
but I think it's interesting that someone who was born in the US, a Jamaican that was, um, wanted to, yeah, I guess like push back at that because I think there's a larger conversation to be had, but like for you to claim that, I feel like one would just be I'd be like that's why I was like, oh yeah, Raquel does say that. Like I could see it going either way. But I
Mhm.
think for someone to push back, it's like interesting. I wonder what is in that pushback for them.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of pushbacks in the broader conversation about diaspora, Jamaican diaspora,
Yeah.
the performance of identity. And I think
Mhm.
maybe we'll kind of get into some of that later because I feel like I think about that. But yeah, that's interesting. But I also think you could go either way with if you said Jamaican or Jamaican.
For sure, for sure. I know when I grew up, and we'll definitely probably end up talking about things like this later on in the interview, but I had this person tell me, older person tell me that because I didn't live in Jamaica until I was 18, I wasn't actually Jamaican.
Mm,
And at that time I wasn't 18 yet. I was like, well, I'm not 18 yet and I wasn't born here, so I'm not American either. I guess I'm neither Jamaican
mm.
nor American.
Oh, I mean, yeah. And I wonder if that like pushed you subconsciously to there. I don't know. There could be so many reasons, but it's also like, oh, did that make you think you couldn't say I'm Jamaican? And I mean, yeah, I guess it's a broader conversation, obviously, but like you still have to deal with, also don't, well, yeah, you can figure out what you want to take out, I guess, since this is your thing, but like you obviously have to deal with like, yeah, just around citizenship and paperwork and documentation.
Yeah.
And so whether you came over at 8 versus 18 or whatever, like that's still there. So I guess it's like what the rubric is to certain people, that rubric is completely gray. Obviously, if we were in the UK, there wouldn't be any Jamaican, British, or whatever. It would just be I'm Jamaican. Where are you from? The answer is where are you from? It's Nigeria, it's Ghana, it's Jamaican, it's Guyana, whatever the case is.
Hmm.
So that's all obviously ordered by different relationships to empire. So it's
Hmm.
like interesting, like, like my cousins are one generation removed. My cousins in the UK are one generation removed. Like we're like I'm first generation, but my cousins are like second generation.
Yeah,
Because of when people came over, like when the
right,
US family came over versus when the UK family came over.
right.
Like they came over on Windrush, obviously, for the UK side. But like they're they're gonna say I'm Jamaican. Like that's not kind of questioned because of just like how they talk about things over there. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's just there's so many little pockets to
That's
explore.
so interesting. And of course, the first set of questions that we have are around identity and reggae, right? So let's keep thinking about this idea of identity. In what ways has reggae music shaped your understanding of what it means to be Jamaican, particularly while living in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, again, I feel like I'm just gonna be like, there's so much every time you ask something because there's just so much. But I mean, I think there's like a cynical way to answer it and there's a less cynical way to answer it. One, maybe for me as a person, just on an individual level or just on the level of my family, like it's just something, reggae as music is something just is really kind of immediately kind of grounding. And so I think like that is my like general relationship as just an individual or in terms of like my family
Hmm.
in the community that I grew up in. But I also think that in the US, let's say outside of New York or maybe even New York and Boston, whatever you want to say, um, I think someone said it, I was talking to someone a long time ago, but just like the visibility of certain cultures or even like a canonical identity, like being Jamaican is a very visible identity in New York and maybe Boston. I don't know if we want to put on the level of New York, but let's say New York and Boston.
Right.
But outside of that in the US it's not again like compared to a place like um in the UK, for instance. So I feel like like more immediately to your question, reggae is something that people know, even if Jamaicanness isn't super visible. It's something that is just like easily known, maybe sometimes in a reductive way, but it's at least something that's like known and someone can say, oh, reggae. So even just like with there's some places like well this isn't necessarily it's actually not the US, but I know there's some places in Asia, East Asia, where like dreadlocks are called reggae hair. Um
Really?
yeah, yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Locks, and sometimes it could even be like maybe even how our hair looks as in like a twist out or a braid out, just with the whatever crinkle or whatever that we have for a braid out, twist out, and even I think that sometimes, but I think it's mostly for like locks and dreads and stuff. So, but yeah, I think it just again not the US particularly, but it just points to I think an example of just like it being something that's immediately legible. And so I think sometimes in terms of shaping or like what it means to be Jamaican in the US, there is, I think, a reductiveness of identity because of the hypervisibility of that like maybe sometimes can feel alienating or it doesn't reflect the depths of our identity. So
Right.
that's maybe the more cynical answer, I guess.
I mean, when we talk about the reductiveness, I know that when I was working in the earlier stages of my PhD, I was doing an independent study on opera. And I was talking with someone who I didn't realize at the time, but they were also doing work on opera. And they're like, why would you do something as stuffy as opera? I thought
Mm.
you were doing reggae, which is more chillaxed. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
well, reggae has very serious political undertones
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
overtones, for that
Mm-hmm.
matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or something along those lines. But sometimes you have to study things like opera to make it legible to those people who think it's just a chillax genre.
Yeah, yeah.
And that
Like it,
was she like, had a kind of reaction to that.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's yeah, it's kind of condescending.
right.
Yeah. Well, not kind of, it is, but
But yeah, there's things that you fall into, and there are other layers to
mm-hmm.
it. There are definitely other layers to it, but
Mm-hmm.
um,
It's a pretty anti-black statement as well.
right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we
Mm.
things to think about.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So how about this now? How
Mm-hmm.
does listening to reggae influence your sense of self and your connection to Jamaican identity when you're far from that homeland, that place
Mm-hmm.
where your family calls home?
Yeah, so I think I have a slight, like, I'm slightly reinterpolating maybe the exact precision of the question. But for me, instead of just like listening in general, what I'm thinking of is, do you know the film Sankofa by Haile Gerima?
Yeah.
So that film, Haile Gerima being also similar to you, he's Ethiopian. He came over to the US as an adult, but I think sometimes he also calls himself Ethiopian American, which is interesting. But he's, a pretty Pan-African focused filmmaker and makes films kind of between and about Ethiopia very specifically, and then also just like Black history and experience more broadly. And so one of those films in kind of in a broader Black sense is Sankofa. And in that film, this in like the 90s, this like Black model that's kind of portrayed as like vapid, like she's a model, she's doing well, really up in the white sauce, let's say.
Mhm.
She goes back, she's at in Ghana doing like a shoot on the beach, and then the Elmina Fort is like right over here, and then she gets kind of transported through time to a plantation in the US. And so she ends up like one of her love interests is Mutabaruka, and he kind of is also the main like resistant slave, kind of militant, and like, helps her kind of towards self-discovery as a Black person. She's also like from the future and like trying to figure this out. And I use that as an example because I feel like that film, which I first watched as an adult, but that film also feels really representative of, not representative necessarily. Well, I love the film regardless, but I like Musa Baruka as a character and how he's situated
Yeah.
feels like something that's helpful for how I think of my sense of self,
Mm.
as a Black person in this world, as a Black person in the US, as a Jamaican American, as a person who's Caribbean as well. Like all these kind of um parts of my identity, like him, one, as like, I think also when it comes to like even earlier with this comment about why are you doing opera, reggae is more chillaxed. I think, and like you said, with how political it is and how we know how political it is, a comment like that depoliticizes the genre. And something like Mutabaruka, as he's not specifically Jamaican in this, but but like as a West Indian slave that's on this plantation in the US, something like that also situates how political um we should really think of Jamaican identity as, and also him as a reggae artist. And like, when I think of him in Sankofa, I immediately think of H2 Worker, his song, and think about also the different ways that Jamaican labor comes to be in the US and how that is also erased when we think of migrant labor, immigrant labor, um,
Mhm.
and when we're not thinking of how Black people, broadly, Black people from the Caribbean come to be here and are sometimes going to be undocumented and caught up in the violence of the U.S. immigration system. Like it all, I think, yeah. Mutabaruka, H2 worker, his character in Sankofa as this his character is as this like agent of like movement and self-actualization for the protagonist. Like that is a roundabout answer, but like that is something that kind of helps me think of who I am, Jamaican history, but also the complexities of Jamaican history. Like our family lore is that we have some maroon blood in us, and then, that makes me think of Queen Nanny, but also
Uh-huh.
there's some, complexities in like Queen Nanny as a figure, whether you're gonna take her as a real historical figure or something beyond a real historical figure, but also what some of that sovereignty is based on is complex as it relates to
Right.
Blackness and Black people. So, um, that is like, yeah, I know I'm not exactly answering your question, but that's just that's how I'm making sense of it.
I love that answer, right? Because it's it's folds in the complications of what reggae is, right? So for
Hmm.
me, you have answered in a way that emphasizes reggae as this politicizing agent, right? So for me, part of where I thought you might take that is to talk about the reggae as that mutabaruka in the moment as what awakens us to
Hmm.
ourselves and to our blackness on a certain
Hmm.
level because reggae definitely had that power
Hmm.
and continues to have that power.
Hmm.
Um, and then this idea of a, a distance from home in the film, literally a different distance from the migration, but then on that visit, the move back into the past, so distance from the future, right? I feel like that's a beautiful interpretation of that question. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hmm.
And I think we started to dive into this idea of memory when you were talking about that experience as well. So let's push even more this theme of memory and reggae. Can you share a childhood memory where reggae played a central role in your family or community life?
You know what? There's a lot of way, again, I'm like a broken record. There's a lot of ways to answer that question. And again, I think maybe going to the left of what your question is, um, one of the things I feel like I didn't grow up in the most, maybe, okay, let me say in a broader context, like maybe just like the church community I grew up in and all that. I feel like honestly, a lot of my church is pretty Caribbean, like, um, and West African, and then and then African. Like, it's a mix of all those kind of people in my church. But I would say, like, I say that to say I actually think that something that I had to come to find out as I grew older is like, um, there's like a certain type of I don't know if I want to, certain type of like kind of like bourgeois type of person. And I feel like that was like, so I would say it just didn't feel reggae forward. Like, not to say that's how my house was, but when I think of the broader community I came up, I actually really, it felt, and I don't know if this is like mischaracterizing people, but when I think about a lot of the people, like maybe the people my mom's age that were like in our church community, they aren't necessarily people that, again, this could be a mischaracterization now that I think about it, but like it didn't feel like it was like people that really embrace reggae that deeply. And I
Mm,
think like that's also important to recognize because of yeah, also reggae's relationship to Rastafarianism and how maligned and marginalized and ostracized it is within a Jamaican context, right?
right.
So there's that. And so it's not necessarily like what shaped me, but I also just think it's also illustrative of something. But in terms of like my house and my mom, actually the first thing that I think about is just like her shelf of CDs. And like the way they were placed, I guess. Like there's this Desmond Dekker album that was like on the like left part of it. So when you were looking at it to the side, I would just always see like the first thing I always see and what I think about in terms of the CDs that she owned was this Desmond Dekker CD. And so I think like also and I was trying to look and remember what I actually probably should ask her, but um whatever album it was, like he's on the cover, it's like a full like his full body in the suit. And for me, before I understood, like when I was a lot younger and before I understood the reggae's relationship to other music,
Yeah.
I was like, that wasn't a picture of a reggae artist that I could fully understand, like, because I maybe thought about it again when I was a lot younger, just in the context of like Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, like what it became to be in the 70s and 80s and how it started with like Rocksteady and its relationship to ska and all these things. So that the cover of that Desmond Dekker album and the things that it kind of that um unfurl from it are my understanding of reggae in relationship to again other music, like a more historical understanding of reggae. And beyond that, I think because it was like the album that is just like most visible on the shelf at all times of
Right.
the CD shelf, it also is kind of related to my relationship to collecting and cataloging and preserving,
Yeah.
which is also, my mom's a librarian, I'm a curator, so it's also like central to the work I do and just like kind of
Hmm.
stewarding knowledge, stewarding history, whatever. We're not archivists, but kind of like and not to misuse like archiving as an actual field or whatever, but kind of like when you think of like archiving and all that stuff. So it's just like it's related. So I'm also like beyond music itself, I'm thinking of the visual kind of markers and the visual histories that it provides for me.
That's awesome. There is in I thought if I'm trying to remember if it's in LA proper or close. Roger Steffens has a big archive, big reggae archive. And it
Um,
falls under, I think it's something like I'm gonna have to look it up because it's gonna bother me if I don't look it up. It's something like the Ice family, not Ice or Spice fam, something like that. I have to look it up to get the correct.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. Its largest collection, 6 rooms of his home in LA house reggae archives, which include the world's largest collection of Bob Marley material. Oh, wow.
Yes, the family acid. I was like, it's not ice. Like I knew it was a substance, right?
Mm.
But I had the CI threw me off. The family acid is what it falls under the organization, right? Um and yes, as you were reading right there, Roger Steffens and the family acid, they have uh this amazing archive. And I'm hoping if everything goes as planned, that I would be able to go there one day and
Mm,
view it. Uh,
mm,
just because as you were pointing out, so much of reggae is also the visual
mm-hmm,
and the tactile
mm-hmm.
and all the memorabilia that is tied to it as well, uh,
Yeah.
beyond the sonic. Do you find that certain reggae songs trigger memories of home, whether that is home New York, home Atlanta, home LA, home Jamaica? And how do you navigate those moments emotionally when those reggae songs do that?
That's a good question. I feel like it's not like reggae links to like kind of finite concrete moments. It just kind of is um a sound like a sort of sound that's always been around me. So it feels like just I feel like there's just something, not that I'm an expert on all reggae, or obviously I'm not a musician, I don't make, but it feels like it's just a kind of like intuitive um connection. And I think for me, in terms of navigating those moments emotionally, every time I hear reggae, also honestly, it makes me think of all the reggae that I don't know, just because,
Hmm.
like it just makes me think of that actually. So kind of like I was saying earlier about my relationship being a curator, my mom being a librarian, just thinking about just like information and learning, like I feel like it kind of unlocks my it just always unlocks my desire to really just like learn more about reggae, especially as someone of Jamaican heritage.
Hmm.
So what it kind of makes me think of, it makes me think of just like the more that I should be learning and trying to learn. Um, and I also think just also something I was thinking about earlier was also kind of changing gears was also the theme song for Arthur,
Yeah.
by Ziggy Marley. And I mean, it kind of connects to so many things in terms of like that. Also, just like him singing the theme song and that show being popular. And like, it's not the purest reggae song necessarily, but it's obviously reggae inflected and it's made by a Marley. So that is
Yeah.
the history of reggae, just there. So, I also just think of like that as this very defining thing, especially when we were growing up. And yeah, yeah, there's a lot there, but just like that is something that was like very mainstream, also linked to like it was a PBS show,
Yeah.
so linked to public media, public access, like it wasn't on cable, so it's also something that was more accessible to people.
Yeah.
Um, and there's something I haven't fully understood there, but I just a little thing.
I love that.
Mhm.
That's awesome. And let's dig a little deeper into these ideas of family too that you've brought up a couple of times. Culture, thinking culture, family, and reggae. How has reggae acted as a bridge between generations in your family, especially across continents?
This is not fully my like story, or what I'm contributing to myself, but so I'll just kind of broadly talk about this. But I have cousins that work in music, um, and two of them make music and one's like a music exec, and so well, I mean, they're just really talented and doing amazing things. And I think it's been interesting because one of my cousins travels a lot to Jamaica and to different countries in West Africa, and also, will be in the UK as well. And it's like definitely kind of literally become a bridge across people, like for in Jamaica, in the US, in Canada, in the UK, like people being able to see him perform. They also work with Barris Hammond a lot. So um there's like this intergenerational thing that's being unlocked. Like Barris Hammond is obviously someone who has made music for generations
Right.
and different generations, and just is like such a kind of canonical sound and voice.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
like but more pop inflected. And then my cousin is a little bit more roots oriented. So even just like them making songs together and performing together, it's also like different versions or parts of the different sides of the spectrum of reggae. And so even seeing them
Yeah.
perform, it's like they're very different, but like there's this meeting. And so I think there's just been so much also opened up in terms of like me thinking about like one, just like our family getting to enjoy it, and I think getting really activated by it, and even like um my cousin and my aunt, who's not his mom, but like his aunt too. They made like a video when he was visiting her, like a video of like her reacting to the Born in Jamaica video. Jesse Major, my cousin, Medi's son, and Bears Hammond. And it was just funny because like she loves the video and like so one time she called my cousin and was just talking to her for a really long, and I was there talking to her a long time about how much she loved it and how important it was to her that like our generation is involved in this. And then so I think that gave them idea to like make a reaction video. But just as an example of just like my cousin as a first generation Jamaican, as a Jamaican American, and how like him really like, expressing his identity through reggae music has literally been something that he travels across the world with and literally connects my family. So I think like I'm not the I'm not the musician, like I'm not the one doing it, but I've been able to be involved in that. And then also my cousin, I'm gonna just plug her, Natalie, she's a music executive and she is the one that's like coming up with these ideas to connect people and who's working with people and platforming people and just really being of service to really important reggae musicians. And so,
Mhm.
she has a project that'll come out at some point, that, has people like Barris, as our cousin Medi has, um, Mighty, my other cousin who's the youngest of them, and just like lots of musicians like Jesse Major, like just everybody brought
Mhm.
different people like Earth Gang to work with them, Kabaka Pyramid, all this stuff. So
Yeah.
like also just her, I'm really proud of her for like, because sometimes we get caught up in the identity politics of being American and being of the diaspora and like all the things that comes with that. And I'm just really proud of, she's like, well, you know, I'm Jamaican, and obviously we know there's a lot of things to unpack about diaspora and also American privilege and just all these things, but like I'm gonna do what I can to put our culture on and to be a bridge. So just also really proud of Natalie for doing that and kind of still navigating what it means to be of diaspora. So I've just been really lucky to be part of my family experience and talk about it and just really navigate it with her.
That's beautiful. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome. That's so awesome. Okay, so continuing family.
Mm-hmm.
This next question. In what ways do you use reggae music to teach your children or your child, who is also my child? As I told y'all listeners before, Janelle is my family. And so my child is also her child. You know, we have a village. But how do you teach our Zania,
Mm-hmm.
and other of your younger family members about Jamaican culture and traditions using reggae? Or, mento? Ska, rock
Mm-hmm.
steady.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Zen, zen, zen. Well, also I think of like beyond just like music, I also think about our folk art forms. And so I think the biggest presence in terms of like our cultural history and cultural production has been through Miss Lou.
Mhm.
Um, and she has Lulu, the doll, and Lulu is named both for Miss Lou and for my great grandmother, Lulu Richards. Um, and so, yeah, like, poetry is obviously linked to music. And so I just kind of am thinking about it a little bit more broadly. And so, yeah, I think just like the folk art forms, like through Miss Lou's poetry and that has been something that has been really big to kind of immerse Senya in and um pass down to her. And also, I just like, well, I mean, one of my favorite albums is the Harder They Come soundtrack, and I feel like it's a soundtrack. It's as an album, it's just like, it's a soundtrack. So obviously, there's gonna be a lot of tones, a lot of moods, lots of things because it's in converse. It's for a movie, but for me, the Harder They Come soundtrack is just like it's affirming, it's encouraging, it's wildly expansive, it's resistant. Obviously, like the harder they come is essentially a Western. Obviously in a different context, but even just like what that album imbues is something that I find a lot of value in. So, Xenia loves it and because I play it a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but I also think that like there's so much, obviously with any culture, food is like has so much history. And so like for me, food is also something to like think about historically and culturally. And so even when we think about like we have nutmeg, like let's talk about nutmeg and why we use it and its different forms and all this stuff. Um so I think like because of just how intertwined music and food and experiences, like it's not necessarily specific to reggae, but that's just kind of how I'm thinking about just its depth and how we pass it on.
Beautiful.
Mm.
Awesome. Let's see here. Let's jump to thinking a little bit more about reggae as a proxy for home. You mentioned diaspora earlier, so I want to jump back to that word, right? Would you say reggae can serve as a kind of proxy for home for Jamaicans in the diaspora? Why or why not for you?
Lots of ways to answer that. I mean, I definitely think it can, but honestly, like my relationship to reggae is one that's a little bit more personal. Like I just feel like at this point in time, like um it's more just like playing it at my house, learning more about reggae, just exploring it kind of personally and yeah, through like passing down stuff to Xenia, but it's just like I'm not necessarily like going to a lot of events. But I
Hmm.
also think within that, because of like a lot of the stuff we were talking about earlier, is reggae is like an instantly kind of known thing. Um, I think like maybe sometimes I just like project a lot into it. And I think reggae is something that like it has a very particular relationship to people around the world. Like obviously like there's um very devoted, loyal community of people in Japan, for instance, that are like, devoted connoisseurs to reggae. Obviously, of course, reggae has an identity and a history beyond solely Black people and beyond Jamaican people or Black Jamaican people, Afro Jamaican people, but nominally it's Black and of course it's Jamaican. So I think sometimes like, you know, um, uh, I kind of still figure out how I negotiate like what my place as a diasporic Jamaican is and how that kind of shapes how I engage with. So that's why I think a lot of times it's like just like easier or more comfortable for me to have this kind of like more internal or domestic relationship to reggae.
Hmm.
But that's also just because I'm an overthinker and sometimes I can be shy. So I think that's built on it. But I think like also, I think there's a lot of ways that people in various diasporas feel led to like perform a certain identity. And I think sometimes, yeah, I just kind of overthink that and I'm just trying to unpack that. And so, I mean, I think not necessarily a full answer, but I also wonder what it, how maybe that shows up in um, reggae spaces or like bashments or like whatever. Um, yeah, I think it just makes me turn inward. And I also think being in LA, of course, is a very particular experience where stuff is siloed and it's all around. And it's, just in terms of like the centralization, like it's not like it's like as centralized or as like situated in specific places. So like a lot of the events you go to, um, I go because you're there. Um, but maybe I would go somewhere else. It's just like I just like kind of sometimes just turn inward.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think yeah, that's part of like also just the complexities of how I negotiate my identity. And so rather than like fully answering your question, I think there's so these are the things I'm considering
Right.
and that I think show up maybe in just like identity and diasporic identity. But I love that even just Lamert as a site, as a space, like Jamaicanness is very present, and
Yeah.
that's Jamaicanness through people who are Jamaican or of Jamaican descent, and just kind of the appreciation of Jamaican identity. Like I appreciate that a space that's really important for Black people in LA, also Jamaicanness is present. I think that but something I have been thinking about, and I've been thinking about it recently, is I just saw, I'm not gonna name the film, but I just watched a film that is like a Black film that a lot of Black people are watching and talking about. And it was kind of about like Blackness globally, Blackness diaspora. And I do know that the film, there was a lot of different things proposed for the film, and there were ideas that kind of included Jamaicanness a little bit more, but the final film, it feels like there's one moment where Jamaicanness is gestured to, but like never again. And not that you're gonna mention or include like every single like Black country, but it just was obviously we have an outsized presence. Look about Talawa, all that, whatever. But it made me think of like how much, again, going back to like what is legible about Jamaicanness, how much Jamaicanness is kind of sometimes reduced, I'll say, like even just
Yeah.
like with that comment about chillaxed. And it's not necessarily a comment on this film specifically or just as one thing, but it just made me think of like, okay, there's this one scene where I think it was just like, okay, it was like, and it's an experimental film, so it's experimental, it's layered, it's complex, it's esoteric, whatever. But I know so it has different types of forms. But I remember there was just kind of like this one kind of composed shot with like some rastas and then it kind of like cut to something else. But it just had me thinking of what's gestured to or assumed to be communicated through the visual markers of Jamaicanness. And also, Rastafarianism has an outside presence, but Rastafarians are so persecuted in Jamaica,
Yeah.
and like Jamaican identity globally is much of what people know about it are maybe diluted, but it's still versions of something about it's Rastafarianism, right? So I'm thinking about what shows up in terms of like respectability, what shows up in terms of like how relative to Christianity Rastafari and I'm not saying this is like Rastafarians are like a perfect community, whatever. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying like, relative to like uh just like Christianity in churches, how it's maligned, um,
Yeah.
and how that also is completely turned on its head when you think beyond Jamaica and when you think of how Jamaica is known and understood.
Yeah.
Um, so like all those, yeah, I just kind of went a lot of places.
Yes, so Janelle, I loved what you were saying in that last answer because it talks about various layers of what it might mean to think through reggae as home and also, reflecting on your personality as well. And how, I like how you brought in the fact that, sometimes you might feel shy about something, so you might want to maybe be more introverted that not necessarily want to go to some events. Like you might want to explore personally what reggae means to you. So I really enjoyed your answer to that one. And you mentioned about like Japan already. We've talked about you mentioned like the East Asian culture of like reggae hair. And so I wanted to take a slight detour before we ask our last question to talk about K-pop, specifically about Gabriella by Cat's Eye, which I think I first heard because Xenia was playing
Uh,
um K-pop Demon Hunters and it was one of
oh,
the like shuffle
hmm
suggestions and
hmm
like she just knew the song and I was like, where do you get
hmm
this from?
Was it Gabriella or Touch? Because you've been so out of touch, touch,
Oh,
touch.
that one too, but they
Uh,
um I think Touch led us to
oh,
Gabriella
okay. Mm,
eventually. But yeah, we listened to Touch like maybe 100 times that day.
yeah. And hopefully it was the the clean edit, because no, I'm thinking of the other song, never mind. But,
Okay, I was about
but
to say
remember
you
when we were at the
remember
Halloween
these.
thing and they were playing gnarly and they were playing the explicit one? Because
Oh my gosh.
the assumption is K-pop, and I put it in quotes with cat's eye, but K-pop, oh, it's just like bubbly, da da da. But no, like there's cursing and but like as you know, I have a deep knowledge and interest in K-pop. What that looks like kind of changes. But that's a whole other thing which we won't really get into. Um, and Cat's Eye are if they're a K-pop group or not is actually like a very contentious question. They're a
Right.
collaboration between Hybe, formerly Big Hit Entertainment, that's the agency, the Korean agency which birthed BTS, which I'm a big fan of and have been for quite a while, and Geffen. So it's a you and they're a global girl group, but they operate in many of the modalities particular to K-pop. So it's like very complicated also, like what if they're K-pop or not. It's like a whole thing which people argue about, I guess, on the internet. Um, but you were telling me earlier that, someone told you that their song Gabriella, which Gabriella, they have a um Latin member, I'll make clear, white Latin from what I can tell, member who's like Colombian ever, but like Gabriella is very much like has a lot of Spanish guitar. The video is like a telenovela
Yeah.
style, and like the Latino member sings in Spanish and in parts of it. But so like apparently it has a rhythm in it, the Istanbul rhythm, which I'm not an expert on, but we're just like looking it up before we started recording,
Hmm.
and um. I was actually trying to look for some old texts because I remember, and I found this text that I was looking up um, with my family, and my sister um, is not necessarily as versed in K-pop, but we um, kind of have ongoing like I don't know inquiries into like the relationship between like East Asia and Blackness, I guess is how I would say it. And so we are laughing. Like, I think she was sent a text to our family, like laughing, like before you know it, Hybe, that the agency is gonna be like signing reggae artists or like, and I think yeah, they're gonna buy Island Records, and
Hmm.
not necessarily something we would want, but we were just kind of like joking about it, and like but yeah, I mean, I feel like I want to keep listening to the rhythm and also Gabriella, the instrumental, to try and hear it. I mean, I think something that I've learned through like following K-pop is I don't even know learned, but what I've just always think of is like what people's expectations are around specifically how Black music travels
Yeah.
to Asia, how it circulates. And like everyone knows about the Japanese folks that are super knowledgeable and love whatever reggae. Like everyone knows about that. But beyond that, like how does how do different Black music, because I mean K-pop is built on Black music, it's built on R&B and hip hop, and that's a whole other thing which is like right now becoming particularly viral because there's a Korean American woman who used to work in music that was like basically calling out the Black origins of K-pop, which again is a whole thing, and but really hanging on the elements of it that are appropriative, which is definitely a thing, like that's beyond a thing.
Right.
um so like right now, like everyone is picking up and like stitching her video. And so it's interesting because it's like I was telling Jackie, I was like, did you see this one viral? Because like it's interesting that just this moment, this particular thing is going viral, which talking about appropriation in K-pop, every few months, like there's something that comes up or whatever, and people talk about it.
Hmm.
But I do want to hear if this rhythm is in there. It's not on Who Sampled. We were just looking it up.
Right.
And but you know what? To tell the truth, like I think like and I say this about for like us as Black people broadly, like we get surprised when there are these connections, and so do I. I get surprised. I was like, wait, what? But like sometimes I'm like, wait, we should stop being surprised because but I was like, wait, what?
I
So like
mean,
I do it, but
yeah, okay, so big up Dizzle who identified this and brought it to my attention. Um, I had heard the song Gabriella, but when he
Mm-hmm.
come and say to me, this is a reggae song, I'm like, I have to go listen to it now because I did not notice that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
At no point did I listen to it and say, aha,
Mm-hmm.
this is a rhythm. You know, I didn't know. Um, but going back with that perspective, I was that first thing I picked up on was that strecke, that signature reggae guitar sound. And then you definitely had the Spanish guitar sound
Mm-hmm.
in it that's prominent, but that reggae guitar is also pretty prominent. So, um, when he played the uh who's Jakior's song on the Istanbul
Mm-hmm.
rhythm, I was like, I can hear it. I can hear the similarities. And what he was
Mm-hmm.
saying is that it's the same key and the same chord progression.
Mm-hmm.
And chord progressions can be very similar from song to song.
Yeah.
Um, I can't remember the specific combination that someone was explaining like thousands of pop songs use and
Oh
like
yeah,
why
yeah, like
it's
the
easy.
same one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy to do like mashups with those
Mm-hmm.
similar songs because they have the same chord progressions.
Mm-hmm.
So that can happen definitely, but it was a very interesting combination of sounds to listen to play them back and forth with each other. So,
Yeah.
homework for the listeners, go ahead and listen to
Yeah.
both.
Yeah, I will say though that like one, and I'm not gonna talk too long about it, I promise. But one, in many ways, K-pop, meaning like idol music, meaning the groups, like not all Korean popular music, but like K-pop idol music, it's a maximalist genre sonically. So it's like an amalgam. One song will have five different genres in it, from the hook to the bridge to the. And so there's that. Like it is K-pop isn't really its own sonic thing. It what makes K-pop is the amalgamation of like just a lot of different genres in a maximalist kind of approach and framework. And then two is that um the production again, I don't know if this song, like who produced that. And now I'm gonna look it up. But like also just in terms of the producers, like a lot of producers are Black American, and a lot of also Swedish. You know how the Swedes are big into pop. I'm sure you
Yeah.
know more about that than me, like the reason for that. But like there's a heavy of the like Swedish producers and like Black American producers and songwriters. So like I it's like it's just a kind of global production
Mm,
model, and even just where people are from and who's being hired and all that is built on
mm,
Black music, whatever. Not that I've heard like a lot of like reggae like influences necessarily, but I think like that kind of speaks to just like how that could potentially find itself in the song.
mhm.
But now I know we're gonna look more into it and figure out exactly what's going on there.
We have a mission.
Yep.
We've
Mm-hmm.
got ourselves a mission.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. And so the last question of the day before we get ourselves ready for the holidays. Happy holidays to the listeners. Is what advice would you give to other members of the Jamaican diaspora seeking to reconnect with their roots through reggae?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, but I think it again, I do feel like especially social media has kind of hastened towards a certain performance of identity, especially like in the West, in the US and Europe, to like perform identity a certain way when you're, yeah, like especially if you're like first generation, or your family's from somewhere else outside of the US. If you're not the descendant of American slaves, let's say, because we're descended from people who are enslaved as well. We're enslaved. But I think just back to what I was saying earlier, like you don't have to perform a certain thing. Figure out what's true to you, and our identity is filled with complexities and nuances. Um, but also I think like think about like yeah, I would also just encourage like learning the history of reggae, learning how it's linked to other like pop music forms, which then led to reggae,
Yeah.
like reggae came out of covers, right?
Yeah.
And I think of also like go-go music from DC, which is a very like regional music from DC, and how like it exists mostly as covers and there's not a lot of like formal recorded albums. But it just makes me think of like learning the history of reggae is really important to situating Jamaica in a global context and seeing beyond just Bob Marley and just the icons and just it's like, oh, this is just about like people lighting up and it's just chill. Like it's those things, but it's political, it's urgent, it's filled with resistance, and it's ultimately a very important part of Black cultural production. And for me, I love being Black and I'm all about being Black. So I think like it not, which is ironic considering what we just talked about, but again, it's complex for me. But just like, just like for members for I don't know, I'm talking about like Black Jamaican members of the diaspora, because of course Jamaica is multiracial to a certain extent. But like just like yeah, don't separate it from your Blackness. Like for
Yeah.
me, that's what's important. And yeah, learn how it's connected to all these different things that are part of the Black diaspora, the global Black diaspora. And also don't use it as a tool to just separate yourselves from African Americans, which I think is a performance of identity that people feel led to do. But just like learn and figure out what's true to you. And that's all good.
Yee. Thank you so much, Jheanelle.
Thank you. This was nice. I
Oh,
like this.
woohoo. I appreciate you so much for being on Jahmi Roc's Jottings. I hope that we can do this another time, maybe on season 3 again to the
Hmm.
listeners. Happy holidays. Have a beautiful time with your family, your chosen family, your friends, whomever you are sharing the holiday with. And if you're not sharing the holiday with anybody, have a good time by yourself, right? You, yourself, and you. That's all you need, okay?
Yep.
Don't let the capitalist propaganda fool you, okay? All right now.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me, Raquel.
you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm also sending love out to anyone experiencing grief during this holiday season. I'm hugging you. I love you. And I know that this is hard. You will make it through it. And I pray that you can make memories that help you move through your grief in a different way this year. For all of those who are listening, you know what I'm always trying to say whenever I remember it, don't you forget to keep jamming. Take care now.
Bye.